On a winter morning in 1891, a large, solid wooden bench was placed in the courtyard of Glenmore School, located in a remote town in Kansas. Crafted by a local carpenter from ancient chestnut wood, the bench was said to have come from a tree that once grew deep within a forest so feared humans avoided its just weeks after its installation. Headmaster Mr. Jonathan Blackwell gathered the 12 brightest and most promising students of the school and had a commemorative photograph taken with all of them seated on the bench. You note, within the first month after the photo, 2 of those children died of a strange illness. Its symptoms and rapid progression baffled even the most experienced local doctors. Over the next 6 months, 4 more perished in separate tragic accidents. One was crushed by a falling tree, another died in a sudden fire, and 2 drowned in the canal. Then a haunting silence fell over the school. The remaining students and their parents were paralyzed with fear. Yet Headmaster Blackwell dismissed the events as an unfortunate coincidence. Still, every time a new class sat upon the bench for a photograph, the cycle of mysterious tragedies would begin again. By the end of the Shujoth century, the bench had become infamous across neighboring settlements. Locals whispered tales of its curse, claiming that the wood came from a tree grown on land long ago cursed by dark rituals and buried secrets. A doctor, Horatio Palin, who ran a small clinic near the school, wrote in his personal journal, "In all my years, I have never witnessed such a chilling pattern. These children's deaths were so precise, so eerily consistent, that it felt as though some unseen force was working through a list, executing its task with grim in each end by Joshabat." When the last child died from an unexplained fever, the school was temporarily shut down. A local priest was brought in to perform prayers and rituals within the building. Yet the bench was neither burned nor discarded. It was simply locked away in the school's basement. Decades later, when the old Glenmore School building was finally slated for demolition, workers unearthed the bench once again. Within a week, 2 of those workers were crushed under collapsing debris from the same structure. To this day, families in rural Kansas pass down the tale. Anyone who ever touched that bench, anyone who sat upon it for a photograph, was destined to meet a mysterious death sooner or later. And that is why the cursed bench of Glenmore remains one of the most feared relics in Kansas folklore, a silent reminder of the price of forgotten sins and unseen forces that never sleep. On an autumn evening in 1903, 5 years after the Glenmore School building had crumbled into ruin, a new family arrived in town. The Collins family, Edward and Margaret Collins, and their 9-year-old daughter, Emily. They had plans to build a new home on the southern outskirts of town, right on the old land where the school once stood. Unaware of what lay buried beneath their feet, the Collins family began construction. As workers dug into the soil to lay the foundation, they unearthed an old wooden bench, aged yet astonishingly intact. Deep cracks and scratches matching those seen in the decades-old photographs from the school's final days. Emily, a curious and imaginative child, was instantly drawn to it. She insisted the bench be placed in her bedroom so she could sit on it while writing her stories. Her parents, seeing no harm, called a local carpenter to restore and polish it, then set it up in Emily's room. That very night, faint whispers were heard from her room, Margaret assumed Emily was talking in her sleep, but the next morning, Emily told them that a group of old-time children had come to her room, insisting she come outside and play with them. Now, each night, her dreams grew darker and more vivid. Emily told her parents that the children warned her the bench should never have been removed from school grounds, and that until it was returned and buried again, the game would continue. Soon, strange events began to plague the Collins family. Edward Collins's arm was mysteriously caught in machinery at the construction site. No one saw how it happened. Margaret began seeing shadows of children walking across her room at night. No one came when she screamed. Emily's health rapidly declined. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes, as if she hadn't slept for weeks. Dr. Joseph Martin, the town's only physician, came to examine her. But as he stepped closer to the bench in her room, he shuddered violently. Later, in his diary, he wrote, "For a moment I heard a child's voice whisper in my ear. It said, 'You'll let us out?' Dr. Martin warned the parents urgently, bury the bench or burn it immediately. No. But during the very first attempt to remove it, tragedy struck. A rusty nail beneath the bench pierced deep into a worker's neck. He died instantly. The Collins family was overcome with terror. But it was already too late. Emily had started whispering that she wanted to go with the children forever. And one night, she vanished from her bed. The window in her room stood wide open. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no trail. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the air. To this day, the room in the Collins house remains locked and untouched. Locals say if you press your ear against the door, you might still hear soft whispers on the other side. And one of them is said to be Emily Collins. By the year 1911, a strange, lingering silence still blanketed the land where Glenmore once stood. Months after the tragedy, the Collins family had quietly abandoned everything and disappeared. Their home now sat empty, a structure regarded by townsfolk as a place of restless spirits and whispered curses. Elders of the village often warned the younger generation, if you cross that threshold, you might never return. But warnings rarely stopped those who believed more in reason than in superstition. That summer, two brothers from outside the town, Walter and Henry Nelson, purchased the old Collins home. Skeptical of the folklore, they dismissed the tales as nothing more than rural paranoia. Their plan was to convert the house into a writer's retreat school, a haven where authors could find silence and inspiration. The first few nights passed peacefully. Renovations began. Henry selected a room, one marked with the word danger painted in black across its door, to turn into his personal library. It was inside that room, behind a sealed cupboard, that the bench was found again, spotless, preserved, untouched by time. Henry considered it a valuable antique and proudly placed it at the center of the library. That very night, the change began. On the first night, Walter said a child shook him awake in his sleep, yet the room was empty. On the second night, books began falling from the shelves in the library, but only those books that mentioned the death of a child. On the third night, a cough echoed from beneath the bench, dry, sickly, as if a frail child were hiding under it. Henry, a man of logic and science, dismissed the events as coincidences. Until one night he saw them, 12 children, sitting silently on the bench, their faces blank, eyes wide open, staring directly at him, and one of them, a girl, whispered gently, "We're not complete yet. We need your place." Henry felt the temperature in the room plummet. His hands, now touching the bench, began to stick to the wood, as if he was becoming part of it. Yo, Walter, hearing his brother scream, rushed into the room and found Henry unconscious on the floor. But the strangest thing wasn't his pale face. It was the deep, dark lines across his fingers, as though they were slowly turning to wood. Terrified, the brothers fled the house. They chained the bench and locked it deep in the basement, before abandoning the building entirely and returning to the city. But a few weeks later, a poor woodcutter, searching for dry timber before the winter, wandered through the open back door of the vacant house. He never returned. Locals later discovered his torn coat and axe in the woods behind the property, and beside them, a newly splintered wooden plank, and scorched across its surface in a blackened, burning letters were the words, "You join us, or make room." In the autumn of 1920, a new wave of life returned to the desolate lands of Glenmore. After the First World War, the government began developing temporary housing for disabled veterans and their families, right on the grounds where the old Glenmore School once stood. The project's goal was clear: bury the past and build a safe, new future. No, but some things don't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig. Miss Lorena Bachette, a young schoolteacher recently relocated from Chicago, was appointed head of the first school to be built in the area. Intelligent, fearless, and firmly dismissive of what she called village ghost stories, she had little patience for superstition. When informed that a few old pieces of furniture remained in the school's basement, left behind by previous occupants, Miss Batchett eagerly went below, hoping to salvage items for the classroom. There, beneath the dim light and thick dust, sat the same cursed bench, bound in rusted chains, surrounded by faded handprints on the walls. The prints of children, long since, turned to black stains. A local assistant nervously warned her, "Don't touch that bench, ma'am. It's old. And folks around here, they don't trust it." Miss Bachette laughed. "We're here to teach science, not shadows." The very next day, the bench was placed in the main classroom. Same position, same orientation, and slowly, everything began to unravel. The first signs were subtle. Children complained the bench would suddenly feel hot, then ice cold. One girl, Audie, swore something beneath it had grabbed her hand and tried to pull her down. Then came the whispers, voices heard only near the bench, soft and hissing. "Don't laugh. Let us have a turn." Soon sleepwalking and night terrors spread through the children like a plague. One boy, Lenny, was found wandering the school alone in the dead of night. When caught, he repeated the same phrase over and over. We need space. We need space." Miss Batchett herself began suffering from insomnia, migraines, and vivid nightmares. Yet she refused to believe in anything beyond coincidence, until the day the class posed for a group photograph. Same bench, same formation, same still faces. But when the film was developed the following day, there were 13 faces in the photo. One face, blurred, faded, and pale, sat just behind the children. Between them, a child not enrolled in the school, not listed in any records. And the next week, one of the 3 children closest to that ghostly figure, Audie, was found dead in her bed, leaked. No signs of struggle, no marks, as if life had simply left her. Ew. The bench was immediately returned to the basement, and this time the town agreed it must be buried permanently, you know? But as the workers dug the pit, the earth beneath them began to shift, as though unseen hands from below had reached up and grabbed the digger's arm. Kuro. In the end, the bench was thrown into a deep, abandoned well, a well that had been dry for centuries. The sound of the bench hitting the bottom echoed, and then complete silence. Still some say, when the wind blows from the east, you can hear faint voices rising from that forgotten well. Now, we need more space, yours. Time had passed. 8. The well, into which the bench had been thrown during the autumn of Ichenjubite Arsers, was now sealed off within the grounds of the school's new wing. People had forgotten, or claimed they had, but the earth never forgets. Kino. In the fall of Ichenjubite Wushalup, the old Glenmore School was officially converted into a reform school, a place where the city's wayward children were sent for re-education and discipline. A new wall was built, the ground was leveled, and a playground was constructed directly on the spot where that old well once stood. One day, while children were playing football on the field, the ball suddenly vanished. In the search that followed, a student named Martin Gregory wandered toward the old wooden supply shed at the back of the school. There, buried beneath dust, broken furniture, and decaying junk, he saw it, the bench, faded, splintered, worn, but whole. Martin dragged it out and sat on it to rest after the game. That very night, Martin began to scream in his sleep, "Let me go back. I didn't break the promise." "You did. You broke it." Blue bruises began to appear on his body, as if he'd been bound in chains. By morning, he was silent, but his voice had changed. It was older now, raspier, like someone else was speaking through him. From that day forward, strange things began happening to the other children in the school. Some claimed they saw a boy, a stranger, standing silently in their rooms at night, whispering, "Hey, give me back my place." Dark handprints began to appear on the school walls. Small, childlike prints, just like the ones in the Ichenjubite Arsers photograph. Then one day, the school staff discovered an old photo in a dusty office cabinet. It was the same photo, the one with the mysterious 13th face, but this time the face was clearer, and it looked eerily like Martin. Miss Laura James, the head teacher at the time, who had once laughed at such ghost stories, began writing a diary. She recorded each day's unexplained events. October, sure, 1956. Martin repeated 3 times. "Give me back the chains." October Shursan. 2 children disappeared with the football. October Shurchi. The ground around the old well feels wet, even though it hasn't rained. October Ursers. A voice said, "We gave you a place, now give us ours." Then the school shook with a violent blast. The sealed-off well, long thought buried and forgotten, had erupted. Dirt exploded outward. And in the center of it all, Kite the bench, but this time 12 names were carved into its wood. Go. And one space left blank, as if someone's name had yet to be written. That night, Miss Laura James wrote her final entry. I saw the name, the empty space. It's for me. Now I understand. We cannot bury the bench, because it has come to bury us. The next morning, the school was shut down. Martin, Miss Laura, and 3 other children were never seen again. But when the building was finally demolished in Ichenjo by Tivers, rescue workers found something untouched beneath the rubble. The bench, Gut, still intact, and now the 13th name had been carved into it. After 1970 Yund, the land of Glenmore School remained abandoned for years. The government tried to develop a new building on the site, but every fresh beginning was halted by some unknown force. The ground kept sinking, workers were injured, equipment failed mysteriously. Locals began calling it the cursed ground. But then, in 1983, a wealthy investment group bought the land, planning to build a modern residential complex. They named it, Terrace of Hope. During construction, workers discovered the same old-school bench buried in the rubble, still intact, still unsettling. But this time, a new detail emerged. Alongside the 13 carved names, there was now a 14th. Nora? No one knew who Nora was until the girl arrived. When the building was completed, the very first family to move in had a 2-year-old daughter named Nora. A quiet, sensitive child who talked in her sleep. That very first night, she said to her mother, Mom, that bench downstairs, it's calling me. My name was already carved into it. Her mother dismissed it as a dream. But a few days later, CCTV footage showed Nora walking alone toward the storage room, where the bench was still kept. And then it began again. Children in the building started showing the same strange symptoms, screaming in their sleep. Black handprints on the floor, whispering voices, and when they spoke, it sounded like someone or something else was speaking through them. One night, a family spotted the bench on the rooftop, swaying in the wind, as if someone had pulled it up there. Then came Nora's voice, but she was nowhere to be seen. I'm not empty anymore. I've become the bench. The final entry, the building's caretaker, once a student of the old Glenmore School, wrote in his final diary entry, no ordinary bench, it's a doorway. The children who've lost their place, they return, and the children who sit unknowingly, they vanish forever. Only one thing can stop it. Memory, for those who forget, are doomed to repeat. In Ichenju by Basherwu, the building was permanently shut down. No one ever saw Nora again. But even now, when a lone bench sways in the wind, on some quiet, forgotten land, you can still hear the whisper, one more name remains, death.